How do you actually stay in shape when you are a full-time gigging musician? Alright, so I used to live this lifestyle. Alright, I used to play full-time, I used to live down in London playing drums full-time before I started my coaching business and moved back up to Scotland. Okay, so I have a very, very good idea of how this lifestyle works and how you need to kind of manage it if you want to stay in really, really good shape or get in shape. Okay, so let's start off with the main goal. What is the main goal that most musicians have when it comes to, their health, physique and performance? So typically most musicians are just going to want to be fitter, healthier, have better energy levels, shift the belly fat which has accumulated over the years, and generally just have an athletic looking body. Not massive like a bodybuilder, but lean, toned and athletic so that they look good on stage and actually just feel confident on a day-to-day basis. So that's the kind of main goal most musicians have, okay? But what are the struggles? What are the struggles that we face as full-time gigging musicians? So one of the biggest struggles musicians are going to come up against is routine, because the nature of the job is pretty chaotic. You're always moving around, you're in different venues, you might be on tour, you might be driving up and down the country, flying all over the place, in tour buses, etc. And then, when you are back home, maybe you're doing gigs around town, stuff like that, recording sessions, teaching, it's just crazy, it's hectic, because it's not like a set 9 to 5 routine like a lot of people have. So I call the musician's routine, I call it a non-routine, because it's never going to be completely routined on a day-to-day basis. But a lot of musicians lack some sort of baseline structure that goes through the chaos. Alright, and that's when having a solid plan around your training, your nutrition, your daily habits, like daily non-negotiables that are going to keep you lean, strong, fit, healthy, energized. That's where having these sort of key daily non-negotiables is so important, especially because the lifestyle is so chaotic. Another problem you might be coming up against is simply just not having a Scooby what to do with your training, whether that's in the gym or at home. You're just kind of winging it. You do not have a plan, and without a plan, you're going to lack the confidence, you're going to lack the conviction, you're not going to trust what you're doing, so you're not going to give it your full intent, and you're going to be way more likely to just be hit or miss with it. But when you have a plan you actually trust, then you're going to follow through with it, because you're going to see results, you're going to have that trust behind it, and then when you start seeing results, that's just going to snowball, turn into more driving motivation to get more. So it's about having a plan you trust, so that you're not just going in there and making it up as you go along, and a few weeks down the line just being like, is this even working? What am I even doing here? Another big struggle is going to probably be nutrition. How the hell are you meant to handle your nutrition when you're on the road, when you're playing gigs, when you're getting in late at night, when the cravings are hitting, and a lot of the time as well with musicians I talk to, they tell me they want to get said result. They talk to me about their nutrition approach, and they don't know their numbers, they're not really sure what sort of quality of food to eat. Then when it comes to gigging, they have no plan around how they're actually going to make it work with the food that's available at gigs, or when they're driving around the country, stopping at service stations, or just travelling in general. They don't have any sort of plan in place to make sure they can stay on target during those times. So it's just that lack of knowledge around nutrition that I feel is really prevalent within the music industry. And nutrition's super important for health, energy, performance, and just feeling your best. So we need to treat ourselves like athletes, essentially, with our training. with our nutrition. We work, incredibly hard jobs. We put our bodies through a lot, and quite often, our training and nutrition are just like an afterthought. Okay, so we need to start treating ourselves like athletes. We have a high energy job. We put a lot of work in. We push our bodies hard, so we need to treat ourselves accordingly. Another thing that crops up a lot is mental health. Musicians struggling with their headspace, and honestly, the biggest thing that will help your mental health in this game is staying on top of your habits, is having some structure, some plan in place around the chaotic life, a plan in place around your training, your nutrition, your lifestyle habits, managing your alcohol consumption, all of this kind of stuff, having a underlying sense of purpose, on the times that you're not gigging. I find a lot of musicians struggle with finding purpose out with the gigs, out with the recording sessions, the dead time. Like, what are you doing? What are you actually doing with that dead time? It might be practicing, but chances are, and I find this with a lot of people, like, they used to practice loads. When they built their craft, when they really, really, accrued their skills. But these days, now they've got the skills, sometimes that dead time just suffers a little bit, and you feel like you're kind of wasting it, and there's no sort of like purpose and structure. And that's where like actually having a plan around your health, your performance, really, really helps. Really, really helps keep the mental health, keep the headspace in a good place, because you have that goal, you have that target to aim for, you're working towards something, you have the sense of purpose. This next one can actually be a huge problem for a lot of musicians. It's alcohol. Okay, sometimes the social drinking can just get out of hand. You're always going to be in environments where it's very, very tempting to just get a drink. You're in bars, you're in venues, you're on tour, and then on your days off, your friends are saying, do you want to go for a pint? Okay, it can build up very fast to the point where you're like drinking 4 or 5 times out of the week, and like that 3 pints a day or 4 pints a day, it adds up fast. Not only in terms of like the calories, but more importantly in terms of what it actually does to your energy, your health, like your sleep. It's going to affect your sleep massively, which is then just going to have that domino effect, and the next day you're going to wake up with a slight hangover. You're going to have less energy, less drive to stick to your training, stick to your nutrition, and it just kind of makes the whole thing a mess. So with alcohol, what advice I always give is just pick and choose your battles with it. No one's telling you to stop drinking. Like, you do not have to stop drinking entirely, but if you're drinking 4 or 5 times a week and it's actually having like a massive impact on your health, happiness, mental health, your energy, productivity, drive to do things out with, just show up for work, then yeah, it is actually a bit of a problem. So just pick and choose your battles with it. It doesn't have to be 4 or 5 times a week. It can be once every 2 weeks. Just save it more for special occasions. It also feels better as well when you're not doing it so often. It does become more of a kind of special moment. So we've talked about the goals, we've talked about the struggles, but what is the solution? What is the actual solution to finally get you lean, fit, healthy, full of energy, actually looking the way you want when you're on stage, and just having that confidence in day-to-day life because you actually respect how you look, respect how you feel, have good habits, good discipline, good purpose and drive across life? What is the actual solution? Solution is just learn from someone who's doing it. Learn from someone who has the result that you want, okay? And that's where I created my program. That's where I created my program, Evolve. It's the same system that I use to stay lean, to stay fit, to stay healthy, high energy. And it's the same system I use with my clients to get incredible results. It's a system that looks beyond the gym, it looks beyond training, okay? That's a very, very important part of it. Your training is very, very important. You need to be staying consistent. You need to be managing your loads in the gym. You need to understand good form, good technique. All of this stuff is incredibly important, but if we're ignoring the other 23 hours of the day, you know, your lifestyle habits, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. All you're going to be doing is adding more stress to your life. So the program I have, it is a very, very sort of holistic program. It looks at everything. It's a big picture program rather than, yes, let's just drop your calories as low as possible and make you train every day. That's like absolutely ridiculous. It's stupid. We actually look at your health, your performance. We take a big picture viewpoint and we make sure all the boxes are ticked so that you actually have that purpose, that drive across your life, and you feel high energy, you feel healthy while doing it as well. So yeah, if you're a musician and you want to get in shape, get in touch, and we can book in a call and chat about your goals a little bit further. Chat soon.